The agency is now officially just about a week out. And today I wanted to put together my second mock offseason for the Detroit Lions. So today we have our mock offseason 2.0. Let's get right into it. So yes, we're going to be doing a free agency and a mock draft for the Detroit Lions in today's video. If you have not seen these, I basically take what these guys are projected to make in free agency, make some signings, kind of fill out the roster, going through a free agency process. There is no simulator for that, so instead, I'm just kind of signing on what these guys are expected to make this offseason. Obviously, it's a two-way street, and there's a chance that some of these moves that I make, the player doesn't actually want to come here, and the deals could definitely be off, but I don't focus as much on with the deals, the details of the contract, backloading the guarantees. It's more just to focus on the per year basis. But as you're going to see by today's salary cap, there's definitely a lot of flexibility if you want to look into that a little bit more. And then we're going to go through the mock draft simulator on Pro Football Focus, make some moves, and put together a projected 53 kind of man roster for the Detroit Lions. And this is not a perfect science, but that's kind of what the offseason is. I really think that this offseason hit that for the most part. There are some things that I would have liked to maybe hit a little bit more throughout this entire offseason process. And I guess I could talk about that as we're going through it. For the most part, I do think it was a pretty well-rounded mock offseason, maybe a little bit more so than last time. And my goal for this mock offseason was to make sure that I didn't go out and just add the same players that I did in the last mock offseason. So for the most part, I don't think there's a single carryover player that's an outside addition or a draft pick that we also brought in mock offseason 1.0. This should all be new. So this is going to be fantastic. With the inside the house moves, I tried to change it up a little bit. So last time I told you that the next time I did it, I wanted to have some different moves that I made through the in-house options because I wanted to change up how the process would go about, because I think the Lions are going to have a ton of options. I think there's multiple ways they can go about this. And because it is a two-way street, there are multiple in-house options that may want to go elsewhere, may want a bigger opportunity elsewhere. Maybe they get paid more money elsewhere that don't end up sticking around. And I think that's what this free agency is going to revolve around, is mainly in-house players can we actually get back this offseason. But to take a different approach, so I ended up going a different direction. This isn't necessarily exactly how I would do it, maybe per se. I think mock offseason 1.0 is a little bit closer in terms of a guy like Carlton Davis, but this time I wanted to change it up just to give us some different results. Chris Board, a return of Chris Board to the Detroit Lions. He was with the Baltimore Ravens this past season. He's projected to get a 1-year, $1.9 million deal. That's his market value. And I decided that I thought that was a good financial price point to bring it back for a single season. We're losing Jalen Reeves-Maybin this offseason. Replenish, I think, some of that special teams value, but also some of that coverage ballot value, that's third down sub-package value. Chris Board was a guy that I liked as a Lion, and then we lost him to Baltimore. I felt that he was more utilized in zone coverage. That may not be true, but just from what I had watched of Chris Board this past season, only played about 160 snaps, but it was pretty good in zone. He was pretty controlled as a zone coverage defender. He was reliable in coverage, as I think he pretty much was with us as well. Maybe not the biggest playmaker, but he was reliable. As a run defender, he's got the body type, 6'2", 240, but as a backside defender, I think he's just inconsistent, scrape, staying away from blocks, not getting latched as consistently at the second level. But he's a nice, reliable tackler. He gets to his spot pretty quickly on the play side. I think he's a pretty well-rounded backer as a true backup linebacker that brings special teams value, but then also you feel pretty good about in sub packages. I think that he can be a little bit better as a pure man coverage linebacker, but that's really just kind of replenishing what we're going to be losing in Jalen Reeves-Maybin. So welcome back, who's going to be 30 years old, Chris Board, to a 1-year deal. I'm going to include Shane Zylstra. I didn't go into a ton of the smaller moves because, again, some of those don't really affect the top 51. Of course, we're not including UDFAs in this as well. It doesn't really matter because we're only kind of taking the top 53 when we do this mock offseason. But I did want to point out that I am going to bring Shane Zylstra back essentially on a minimum deal. I do like Shane Zylstra. It's unfortunate that he had the injury a couple years ago, and it felt like he was kind of on the upward swing for the Lions. I think bringing him back with some of his coverage upside, absolutely okay to do. And I think he's actually been improving as a blocker recently for the Lions. So I like the idea of bringing Shane back. He's still only set to be 29 years old. And so to get him back for another season, that consistency with Goff, right? There's going to be a lot of changes this offseason. Have a guy that just has kind of a rapport with the quarterback already. I think Shane Zylstra has that if we have to go that direction, and potentially could just slot in as tight end number 3. And it gives us flexibility throughout the draft that we don't have to go after a tight end if we don't find that available. Then we go to another out-of-house option, and we're going to be bringing in safety Eric Murray. It's a player that I had noted on one of our Bleacher Report streams. By the way, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern time, I'm live every Monday, Wednesday, Friday over there doing a stream of something. So we're talking about something Lions related if you're looking for more Lions content. And Eric Murray was one of the guys that I had pointed out as I thought would be a very interesting fit on a cheaper option for the Lions. It was one of my more free agent target videos because he was very capable in man coverage, veteran, 31 years old. Man coverage, he was one of the more effective safeties that I had seen, especially for that price point. I think that he is a striker when he works downhill against the run. He's dynamic at the catch point. He's got a transition burst in man coverage, which makes him a little bit more effective for that ability to step down into some of the slot roll. It's the longer developing routes that lead to more trouble. Of course, if you constantly put him on a receiver, that's going to be a little bit of an issue with some of the makeup speed. This is just a productive player, and obviously Texans had a fantastic defense, and he was a big part of that. So I'm bringing in Eric Murray to just kind of solidify a veteran in the back end that I trust is going to be a playmaker, and I think that's what our safeties are right now, is playmaker, exactly what Eric Murray is. Now we're going to go to Bobby Brown III. Now, this is a different move, but it's a guy that I've been a fan of for a while because we keep facing the dang LA Rams. And the guys that would always stand out to me would be Bobby Brown. He's 6'4", 325 pounds, former fourth-round pick. He's super young. I don't know what his actual market value is. There wasn't even a number set for this. I saw him in at $2.5 million. By the time we're seeing this, I actually may move that up. I do have cap flexibility, as you will see. I'm currently set with $16.8 million in cap space for this season. So if we just want to project it like $5-6 million, and of course, like I said, I didn't really go into detail, so I could easily open up space if I backload any of these deals. And I didn't backload really any of them outside of one, which we'll get to. So I'm going to have flexibility here. I just put it at $2.5 million. I don't know what it's going to be. Definitely could be higher than that, probably given his age. That's probably most likely, but I'm willing to go up to like $5-6 million for a singular season. And maybe at that point, even a couple of years for Bobby Brown. He is a guy that's a little bit more proven as an interior defensive lineman. He can clearly play the nose tackle position. Yeah, I think he gets pushed off a spot a little bit. He's a little bit naturally a little bit higher in terms of his leverage, but he has fantastic length, 35 inches, which I know the Lions clearly value. He doesn't bring a lot of pass rush juice or production there. He's definitely going to be taken off the field on third downs, but there's flexibility to his game. He's a smart defense lineman. I think he has fantastic vision through blocking schemes. He finds the ball consistently. Because of his ability to kick out outside of a guard, move up and down the line of scrimmage, Bobby Brown was always just one of those consistent players that found his way to be impactful against the run. He's got a little bit of knockback within his game because of some of that lockout ability. There's some athleticism there. I'm a fan of Bobby Brown. He's always someone that I circle when we had to play the Rams. So for me, this kind of solidifies again that backup nose position, which I think is a great spot to do it, is through free agency rather than maybe even through the draft. We can do it through the draft just to make sure that you have a guy that you trust there. And Bobby Brown is one of those players that if it was on a prove it deal and if it was, on a reasonable contract, he could potentially earn a spot to keep staying around long term. Like he's in that age range. So this would be, to me, one of the higher targets I think on my list for the Lions this offseason as a guy to keep an eye on. Bobby Brown from the LA Rams. Next up, we have Dan Skipper. This one to me is a no-brainer. We did it last time. 1 year, $2 million is with market value. We're bringing Dan Skipper back, man. He just brings, I think, much more consistency in the pass protection than you would expect. Obviously, he's our jumbo package offensive lineman, but I always want to have backup tackles solidified. It's not a price point that means that, hey, if he's, Giovanni Manu's the better man, that he can't just take a spot. He absolutely can. There's even a role where you could cut a guy that has a $2 million cap hit. But if that's really what we can get him back on for a single season, I feel much more comfortable knowing that I have him under contract than not having him under contract and just relying on Manu and potentially a draft pick. I feel much more comfortable with Dan Skipper knowing that he's here if I have to go to him and the flexibility that he's been able to bring to the table. He just got better and better. Limitations as a whole within his game as a run blocker, but in pass protection, I think he's got better and better, and he proved to be pretty good in games that he had to start, especially as a pass protector. Then we move to Tim Patrick. Again, this one's easy for me, $1.7 million for 1 year. Absolutely bringing back Tim Patrick. It's not a long-term deal that I'm locked into here, but he earned this contract, right? Really was super reliable with his hands this past season. It was great to see him finally healthy. There's an overlap here with John Morton, so it just makes even more sense to bring him back into the building. I'm sure he's going to want to have him back after the season that he just had. There's a run after catch ability. He added a different element to what we were offensively after the catch, opening himself up in zone coverage. Yeah, there were limitations, top of the route, separating, those kind of things at times, but he was a big body that I think grew really quickly with Jared Goff, a comfortability that really stood out. So I'm bringing Tim Patrick back on a super reasonable deal. If he has to be one of your top three receivers, you're comfortable with that. Then we go to Kendall Vildor. Again, I have him on a minimum deal. We could probably raise this up, though, if you wanted to a little bit to like $1.5 million. He may be due for a little bit of a pay raise because Kendall Vildor has, I think, continued to improve for the Lions. He's still with Deshaun Townsend now. This is great to keep him kind of latched into a guy that he was with back when he was drafted for Chicago. So to keep him around there is great. And to me, Kendall Vildor is just built for man coverage. He's built to be physical. He's built to press. He's built to get up in guys' face. And the Lions want to continue to do that, so why not, right? There's still things that you want to see improve. I thought the run defense was kind of like some of the biggest struggle I had last year because he was very reliable there and he has a skill set for it. But at times last year, I was like, I'm not really sure what he's doing. But in coverage as a whole, there was no doubt that he took a big step forward. Then we go to a new addition, and that is Joseph Osai. So now we get back out of the house. And Joseph Osai was a guy that I found really late when putting this video together in terms of free agency. because I was trying to find a defensive end that I thought brought some length, brought some upside, could kind of fit into like that 1 year prove it kind of deal. And really, I didn't expect Joseph Osai to fit that for me. But ultimately, after watching him, I was like, you know what? I think this does make sense. 6'4", 265 pounds. I think he's a former third-round pick. He was with Cincinnati this past year, who obviously struggled a lot defensively. And Joseph Osai got a good amount of snaps because of that, played a lot of snaps, racked up 31 pressures, which is nothing incredible, right? It's average for the amount of snaps that he had, as well as 16 stops. But the play style that he brings, length that he brings, and the flashes of an ability to set the edge, the flashes of ability to lock out, actually shed at the point of attack, just feels like a Lions defensive end. They always like length. They like guys that have a crazy motor, and I think that Joseph Osai absolutely has that, and I think he's just going to fit into what the Lions want to be schematically. This is a price point where, again, you could get off it if he doesn't earn a spot, but it's great for a prove-it type of deal to bring in a young player like this, where, in this case, I'm keeping Zadarius Smith around, so for me to bring in a young guy like this that's super hard-nosed, that can slip blocks, work stunts effectively, and be pretty powerful at the point of attack, it just makes sense with kind of the timeline that we're on to bring him into the building and allow him to compete during the offseason. So Joseph Osai at 25 years old next season, welcome to the squad. Now, I am going to bring back Levi again. So I made this happen in the last one, but here was my reasoning. I wasn't actually going to come in and bring back Levi. My plan was, I'm probably not going to bring back Levi. I really want to shake this up. But when I started going through the options at defensive end / defense tackle, especially a guy that can play both, but really just defensive end as a whole, you see I just brought in Osai, I didn't feel very comfortable with how much I would truly have to spend to get a guy that was like, oh yeah, I'm confident he's a guy, versus a guy that I'm like, I'm not really sure what I'm going to get here, but he's much cheaper. Like, the balance was way off from what these guys are projected to get, and that's because pass rushers get paid, right? Those guys always get paid a ton of money. And if Levi's really projected to get 2 years, $8.25 million, I think I would do that in a heartbeat. Obviously, like, I know that I have questions about long-term and health and things along those lines, but a 2-year deal doesn't lock me in of anything I'm super concerned with. And there's no doubt the way that he played last season, the way he dominated Minnesota, his ability to play defensive end coming into the year, which is the first thing I pointed to, is like, okay, I want an edge setter. I still want the pocket collapser. But then being able to kick to the interior towards the end of the year, where when we didn't have Aleem, and we won't have maybe Aleem for the beginning of this season, to have Levi that can just step into that role is fantastic. So for me, Levi, I just couldn't find a guy that actually made sense to be like, yeah, move on Levi for this guy. Maybe I'll find someone as I continue to work through it, but nobody really stood out. I mean, I was looking under everything. And DeMarcus Walker out of Chicago is like, that makes sense. It's not an upgrade over Levi. And I think Levi, as long as he wants to be here, I think the Lions are going to want to have him here. He was a true definition of toughness, grit, fighting back from the injuries that he went through. And yeah, there's still things that I want to see get improved, but he's definitely got better against the run. He's been much more and more consistent every time we've seen him. And this past year, he was consistently on the field, and he can get after the quarterback. There's a real ability to do that, especially from the inside. He could be a third down piece. So when you bring in a guy like Bobby Brown, who's going to be off the field, Levi helps you a ton. The flexibility is amazing. I think Levi at that price point is a bargain. I'm going to bring him back. Now, here's the one big change that we did make, and that is Ife Melifonwu is back with the Lions this time around. The problem is I had no idea what to project his contract as. Now, you could argue this is too cheap. Some would argue this is too expensive. I've seen some projected like 1 year, $4.5 million. So I didn't want to go that low because that does feel too low for me, especially with how good this player is. But Brad Holmes spoke about proven goods, which is why I brought back Levi, and I'm bringing back Iffy. Obviously, I want to bring back some of these guys. And while I think, obviously, the main focus of free agency is once again going to be seeing what kind of guys that we can actually bring back. And to me, Iffy, even though he's in a tougher spot than Levi, because Levi's coming off a really nice season, if he's coming off missing a chunk of time, a lot of time once again, and I don't think he had the production that he had in 2023 specifically. But if he, to me, went on the field, there is no doubt that he is a good player. The more I thought about it, like, there's no question he's a good player. It gives him the opportunity to continue to grow in that area, but we know he's a great blitzer. He's now our third safety. The Lions utilize a third safety. Now, could Iffy want to go elsewhere? Absolutely. And here's how I look at it. Iffy could definitely want to go elsewhere, one, to maybe just get a better opportunity, because he could be looking at it saying, look, you got Kirby and Branch. You're probably going to extend both of these guys. Where do I actually play out long-term here? So there's a real opportunity. He's like, I want to go elsewhere. I want more opportunity. Or there's a flip side where other teams are offering him multi-year deals, and the Lions like, I don't know if we're comfortable with that. That would make a lot of sense too. But I'm looking at that as, okay, that means that maybe for the Lions, the best case is short-term deal, like a 1-year deal. We'll just pay him more than maybe what some of the longer-term teams would be willing to offer him. That way we can kind of incentivize, hey, stay here. Like let this be your prove-it year. Now, it's a tough spot to be in, because how do you prove yourself when you're not like looked at as one of the top two safeties? But I don't doubt there's going to be competition. I just know that he's probably not going to be one of the top two safeties. It's a weird spot to be in. Ife Melifonwu, out of a lot of these guys, out of Carlton, Levi, Barnes, feels like one of the most likely guys that would be like, I kind of want a shot elsewhere. But because I didn't bring back Iffy last time, and he is a good player, there's no question, he just isn't always on the field. I wanted to shake it up, bring back Iffy Melifonwu as our third safety to compete to be a starter this upcoming season, find a role for the guy. I thought last year, like, hey, he might have to play in the slot. Remember, we talked about that before the season to find a way to be here long term. He's got to find some way to kind of crack through this roster if Branch is going to play safety. But this does give the Lions flexibility to say, hey, Branch, we're putting you in the slot. We're going to push you back to safety, Iffy. And obviously, injuries do happen as well. So there's no doubt that a path can be created here. And you also keep in mind that in this free agency, I didn't bring back Carlton Davis. That was another change that I made. I would love to bring back Carlton. I would love to prioritize that, but I didn't this time around, which could help his chances to actually getting more snaps in the back end for the Lions somewhere. So Iffy Melifonwu is back on a 1-year, $6 million deal. They're out of house signing, and that is going to be Devin White from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but then also the Houston Texans. Now, we know how good Houston was when we faced them. I mean, that team was just flying around. So I'm looking at every Houston guy like, wait a minute, hold up, who's available? Hewitt's available. Let me check him out. And I think that this is an interesting piece because he fits clearly into that category of, to me, even more so than a guy like Devin White. He was a high draft pick, obviously top 10 draft pick, had a great start to his career, really fizzled out, kind of slowed down. Even this past season, probably not a great season for Devin White, limited in terms of snaps. But you're getting him at that 1-year prove-it deal type of price point that you knew at one point he was fantastic. He, to me, also brings something different to this team. He'd be a very good blitzing linebacker, which right now, I think Jack Campbell got better as a blitzer, but I don't think we have like elite blitzers at that second level. He'd bring us a much better blitzer, though he didn't finish nearly enough last season, had too many missed tackles, specifically in the backfield. And to me, I just think that that aggressive nature, a downhill style that can fit with Jack Campbell is what he'd fit into. I think there's a real special teams upside here as well in terms of underneath coverage. There's an effectiveness, right? He's got fast hips. He transitions pretty well. Some of the level 1 coverage pieces, spots that you can use him in, caught up at the second level a little bit too much blocked, but he's a thumper. Like his backside seat as a pursuit backer. He's a true will linebacker. And there's things that I don't love about his game. There's a reason that he's at this price point, but to get him here with Casey Rogers now as our defensive line coach, a weapon kind of at that second level that really brings a different element to the team as a blitzer, I thought it was worth taking the shot on a guy that could potentially be a long-term piece depending on what he can prove this year, because we know the Lions rotate. We also brought back Craig Reynolds. Of course, that one's kind of self-explanatory why you bring back Craig. You know he's going to do. And then last season when he was in the game, he played well for us. Trevor Nowaski, exclusive rights free agent, placed that tender, bring him back, no question there. Derek Barnes also going to be brought back. I want to bring back Derek Barnes. I pretty much gave him the same contract as last time. He was the one guy I really backloaded because I gave him 2 years, $14.5 million, $7 million this year, 7.5 next year, just to kind of make it simple, right? I backloaded a tad there, but because usually that's how teams do it. Derek Barnes under a 2-year deal isn't something that concerns me. Really, the injuries don't concern me with Barnes. It's just about the long-term fit and how much is it worth. But at a $7 million price range with where the cap numbers are going, I think that's a very fair contract. He's another, to me, known good. I think I'm not concerned about like, oh, is he going to be hurt all the time? That doesn't concern me with him. It's not like Levi or Iffy, but it's the flip side of I think that he's just continuing to progress. Every time we see him, he gets better. And his flexibility to step back and play off ball backer is still very beneficial because he looks more natural when he's there. He is an absolute playmaker. He's a tackle for loss player. And we felt it so much when we lost him last year. It was so hard to replace that unique piece that's that long, that's continuing to work in every aspect of his game. He's gotten a little bit better as a pass rusher. He's not great. He's not good. Trevor Nowaski became at a point last year, and it's just the run defense. It's the reliability there. It's the fluidity in coverage when he's playing on the ball. Derek Barnes, I love having in this defense. He feels like a leader of this defense, and you just have trust wherever you put him. Plus, he was around with Kelvin Shepard throughout this entire process of like playing different positions. Where do you fit best? So I think that Kelvin Shepard would likely like to have a guy like Derek Barnes back in the building. That moves us on to 3 more out-of-house options before we get to the draft. And first off, we have cornerback Isaiah Rodgers from the Philadelphia Eagles. He started with Indy. I think he played a lot more zone with Indy. Obviously, they're more of a cover 3 team, but that makes sense, right? He's a little bit of an undersized corner. I think there's some slot flexibility here. For me, what stood out was just very simply the film from last year, right? He didn't play a ton this past season. They're very young at cornerback, of course. They had Slay, who just got released as well. But I think Isaiah Rodgers played well. He's young enough at 27 years old, a $3 million deal, which is what he's projected, is kind of, again, falling into the prove-it category. He was incredibly effective in man coverage in both of the last seasons that he played, but specifically this past season with Philadelphia, he was really good in man coverage, allowing 6 receptions on 13 targets. But what I like about him is he's a thumper. He's going to hit people. He's effective against the run. I like some of the movement skills, some of the control, some of the looseness in underneath man coverage, which can open up some of that level 1 flexibility, which to me opens upside for inside-outside flexion. More specifically, I think he's got a nice, good downhill burst, which opens up some of that off-man transition as well. He's got some reactive recognition when you talk about off-man, being able to kind of dial in on on routes, jump on routes, be on top of things, just play a little bit with a better play speed. And like I said, he's a hitter, man. I think he's a man coverage fit. So to me, bringing Isaiah Rodgers on a prove it type of deal. Obviously, we have a cornerback. It's not like an obvious spot to just fill into, but this was like I just liked Isaiah Rodgers' film. I like the price tag. I like the age. I'm going to bring him in and just kind of see how it shakes out with the cornerback room. But it doesn't hurt to have depth. And truly, I think there's going to be special teams value at worst here. That moves us on to the next deal. One of the bigger out of house moves that I made was again at receiver, weirdly enough. Last time we did Nick Westbrook Akine. This time I went even a little bit more expensive. And I didn't want to go too much here, but Josh Palmer was projected 2 years, $6.5 million per year, which is $13 million in total. I thought, okay, that's a reasonable price tag for Josh Palmer. I've constantly been a guy that's like a fan of the idea of trading for Josh Palmer in the past. Like, hey, you wouldn't have to give up much. Obviously, he's still on his rookie deal. Bring him in. And now he's finally a free agent. So the 6'2", 210-pound receiver that last season had 580 yards, which fits right into kind of what that role is for the Lions. He did have 4 drops, which I didn't love, right? I think that's a little bit too many on 39 receptions. But the positive here is I still really like how he runs routes, right? I don't think there's a ton of flexibility in his game. He's not very loose. I think you see that in his catch radius. I think you see that in some of the sink of his routes where it can kind of be a little bit pitter-patter, slow him down a little bit. But the positive is I think in terms of his footwork at the top of routes, he is a second level. He's a level 2 separator consistently. Reliability, even in some of the underneath routes, right? Some of the discipline, the route detail that he brings to the table. There's a sideline footwork that he has and very reactive hands to the catch. I mean, this is like a very good level 2 threat offensively. He's like the perfect build for being that kind of weapon, which is what the Lions use, obviously opposite of Jamison Williams. I don't think as much as maybe like the vertical sideline piece as a guy like Westbrook Akine could be, and maybe not even the red zone piece, a little bit different, but more of a detailed route runner, which if you give him a 2-year deal, he doesn't really overlap with Jamison Williams at that point. So I think it could still be reasonable to bring him on this kind of contract and just add some real consistency in that room for next year if Tim Patrick is officially gone, and even this year to kind of carve out his opportunity to be wide receiver 3 for the Lions. And then finally, you wrap it all up with Sebastian Joseph Day, another guy that I was interested in. This was during the trade deadline. I thought he was going to get moved, right? Titans had like everybody on the block. I thought he was going to get moved, and I thought he should have been because he was such a good run defender this past year. Now, problem is you don't get a lot of pass rush juice with Sebastian Joseph Day either, kind of alongside Bobby Brown, but you get better against the run. And as you all know, I want to get better against the run this offseason in that front 7. And Sebastian Joseph Day brings that, right? There's a leadership quality to this, but there's a lot of flexibility. You can play kind of like your 3-4 defensive end. He can line at nose tackle if you need him to. 6'4", 310 pounds. This was another guy that I also brought up on one of our Bleacher Report videos as well. He's coming off of 29 stops this past season, 3 sacks, which is okay. But there's an explosive punch to his game in the upper body, which again can create some knockback. I think he's got much better quickness and some of the footwork off the ball, which can allow some wider flexibility than maybe some of the other pieces. His hand placement to you was a little bit inconsistent, but the entry into combo blocks was reliable. There's just a reliability that you get as a run defender. There's a control. There's a balance to his game that he plays with. There's a strong lockout against single blocks. You may want him a little bit more wider as kind of like a 3-4 defensive end, but for the flexibility, especially as a run defender, he's going to make you better there. Guys like Wingo, where you can kind of fit into a similar type of role, who's a little bit younger, it's an opportunity to just add a veteran to that mix. Be willing to do it, especially if I have an out in the second year. So to me, Sebastian Joseph Day, he just raises the floor for you as a run defender. He really rounds out the defensive front. As you can see from this, we were beat up last year. We're going to have the guys for that this year. Okay, so now that I'm finished with free agency, I went back through to kind of make sure I had the numbers set correctly. So this includes the rookie class, which is Calvin Galvin, Malcolm East, Mitchell Agude. I just threw those in as playholders for the rookie class, but I also adjusted Bobby Brown's contract up as well as Sebastian Joseph Day. I found his exact market value on Spotrac, so I included that as well. And I bumped Kendall Vildor up to a little bit more of a pay raise than what it was originally set at. And you can see we have over $11 million here set in cap space. And again, this includes the rookie draft class. Now, let's get to that rookie draft class. All right, so that moves us now on to the draft. Let's get to the really fun part, which is the mock offseason draft. And as you're going to see by this mock offseason draft, I drafted none of the same players that I had drafted last time. So as usual, I try to keep it mixed up, try to add different players, get different discussions going on, and that's what we're going to do here as well. But as always, there's trades, so let's get into it. So first off, round 1, pick 28. This time, we're going to do a shocker here. We're not going to move. We're going to sit at 28. We always move, but not this time. I'm going to sit still, and I'm going to make my selection here. And I don't know where he's ended up going to go, but I think he's a round 1 type of player. I think he's capable of getting into round 1 this year. He had a nice combine as well. But overall, to me, like if you see my latest video get for Shamar Stewart, definitely go check it out. I still have him notched above a guy like Shamar Stewart in this year's draft class, and that is Donovan Ezaraku out of Boston College. Now, the biggest question for me here isn't the talent of the player, right? It's not that is he worth the 28 pick? I think he absolutely is. The biggest question for me here is going to be, are the Lions after this kind of piece. Pocket collapser, the pocket pusher, the defensive end that's just going to collapse things opposite of Hutchinson. That's not his game, right? That's not his game. His play strength to me was average. He does have good length, which is nice, 34 and a half inches, which could allow him to kind of play the sandback role. There is enough fluidity, I think, in coverage there. You could open that up. I actually have a full breakdown of this player, so I won't spend too much time here. Just going to be simply about how the Lions feel about how he fits with them. But overall, in terms of like, can he get after the quarterback? Does he make you much better there? No question. You put this guy on the field with Hutchinson at the same time, you have two terrific pass rushers on both sides. I think he's a very good pass rusher. I think there's a lot of polish that's already there. A lot of things that could be improved upon, but a lot of polish. He's a finisher. He's a closer. 14 sacks this past year, 8.5 year before. He's coming off an 18% pass rush rate and a 10% run stop rate, which shocked me when I went through that number. I think there's more polish in terms of the ability to utilize his hands, which I think are good. There's plus ability as in terms of shed usage. There's a bend to his game. Like, he's not, again, your big pocket collapser, bully kind of defensive end that you think of, but he's a very good pass rusher. And I think he's a round one type of pass rusher. So if you see my grades, you see my prospect grades, he has it, you should check it out. At very worst, you should check out my Donovan Ezaraku video after seeing that that's who my first round pick is going to be. We're going to get better up front. And we just did that right here. That moves us on to the second round. And of course, here's where we get to our trade. So I'm going to move up. So we, of course, have pick 60, and we're going to move up from 60 to 51. And in return, we try to follow the trade value chart, even though that's not exact either. We follow that, not what PFF is just going to allow to have happen. So in return, I had to give up pick 60, pick 101, plus I threw in pick 230 to get back pick 156. That was kind of my kickback because I believe from 60 to 51 is like a 90-point value. 101 is like 96 value. So it actually kind of goes in my favor. So to have some kickback, I kind of flipped those two picks. Would they be willing to do that? Maybe not. But I thought, that's pretty fair there to kind of move back. 9 spots isn't a ton. But regardless, it's all situation by situation. Trade, of course, PFF accepted it. And we moved up to pick number 51. And this was truly just following a player that was just sitting there, and this player that we haven't talked about yet. And it was like, yeah, this guy's going to fall to past 50, where the value I have to give up doesn't like completely just get rid of all my draft picks in this year's draft. I'm going to jump on it, right? Because there is a point where you get to like 42 and you're looking at value and you're like, that's a lot that we'd have to give up, especially if you don't already trade back. This is one of those things that like, I don't need to have all this draft capital. I could just jump up and get a player that I really like that could be a starter long-term for us. So we're going to trade up to pick number 51 and select guard out of Alabama, Tyler Booker, 6'4.5". 321 pounds, fantastic length, 34 and a half inches. Didn't have the best combine, I think, numbers wise. 21 bench press, which makes sense with his length. 27-inch vertical, which is fine. 5'3" at 40, 196, 10-yard split, a sub 8-second 3-cone drill. But this is, to me, I mean, in terms of value for these first two picks, I think you just landed two future starters, no question, especially Tyler Booker. Obviously, this locks in our offensive line here. In this case, we also didn't bring back Kevin Zeitler, which shakes things up. So I was a little bit more of like, I would like to do this. But to me, Tyler Booker he's a long-term starter in the NFL. Now, he may fit a little bit more of that power scheme, right? And some of the redirect ability, some of the movement skills that are very fluid up to the second level to be able to bounce from target to target, I thought was a little bit limited. But he creates a really wide frame in pass protection. He's pretty reliable through stunts. I thought his reactiveness off the ball was a little bit hit and miss in terms of recognition. Some things that could use some cleaning up, no question about it. But he had a very wide base. He created a really nice anchor. I thought he played with a really nice stature and a really nice posture at the point of attack. And once he got those inside hands latched in pass pro, which he constantly plays with, the rep was just over for guys. I mean, it was very difficult for players to disconnect. And his leadership qualities have constantly been the forefront, like how great of a leader that he is. There's a ton of strength in the lower body. You could just see it in the way that he's built. He can kind of maul people, push people over. There's a finishing nature to his game when he gets the opportunity to do so. I don't think he always runs his feet correctly. I don't think he always positions himself correctly into entry, which can lead to not as much movement as you would expect. But he definitely has the physical tools to move guys around. And as a puller, while the redirect may be hit and miss, I do like the angles to typically allow the run scheme to happen. So for me, this is a player that gets a little bit out of control when he kind of launches himself forward. About like where Kevin Zeitler came from, which was all to Baltimore. I think this is a guy that could fit in that kind of scheme. So I think this makes sense, right? It's about that zone scheme that you want to feel good about. I think there's enough like juice to get going off the ball. He may not be the most fluid athlete in space, of course, which kind of changes it a little bit. But for a guard, there's no question. I think he can make it work here. I think there's enough flexibility, and you could potentially have your future now at guard of Christian Mahogany and Tyler Booker, which is fantastic on paper. So that moves us now into our next pick, which is actually going to not happen at 133, which originally we have after moving off 101, but instead it's actually going to move us up to 102 because I made a second trade. Now, this was the trade that kind of got rid of all my draft capital to follow the value chart without going into future picks because I don't like to do that. but it was worth it for me. I'm moving up from pick 133 to 102, so a 31 pick jump. And in return, I had to give Tennessee, who I believe is looking for just more draft capital. I believe I've heard that. I'm giving them 156 and 196 to try to make this as even as possible, with also not giving up future draft picks. You could throw in a future pick. Maybe that would make it easier here, but I'm not trying to do that. I didn't want to touch into that if I didn't have to. And this actually makes the value pretty even to jump up. It's a little bit of a jump, but they get a little bit more volume to work with. A fourth round, a fifth round, and a sixth round. I get 1 4th rounder out of this. But I'm jumping up for a guy that, again, I think could be a starter at some point down the road. And that's Dorian Strong out of Virginia Tech. So out in the round 4, I was like, I'm jumping on this if I can do it. And it worked. And Dorian Strong, for me, he's a guy that I think just fits. He fits with Lions are. We're losing Carlton Davis. To me, he's very comfortable in half turn. I like the ball skills. I like the instincts there. I like the recognition, the communication, the way he kind of works through route concepts. He's comfortable in those half turn looks, but he's also comfortable as a press corner. He's comfortable in the jam. He plays with a really good patience about him where his hands are very active, but he's still under control. And he has some of the foot quickness that really translates to being able to kind of match with routes off the line of scrimmage and then be able to transition and carry things vertically. Now, he's definitely not the loosest corner. It feels like as he's trying to stay connected, things can kind of break loose, and he's a little bit more reliant on kind of finding angles to get back into the play, especially if he falls into more of a trail position. But there's a competitiveness to him. He likes to squeeze routes as they get to the top of the route. I think that he's not overly handsy, though, which is a really nice positive. Now, he can get into some trouble in terms of press release matching because of some of the, I think, the lack of just true fluidity in his game and some of the way that he really has to kind of flip himself to get going, kind of play layers in zone coverage. I think he's built for more of a half-turn press man coverage role, which I think fits exactly what the Lions are. I would like to see a little bit more in terms of just being faster to play a run, but I didn't feel like he was shying away from it. Some guys I feel like are. I didn't get that sense from what I'd seen so far. I do need to watch more, but what I have seen from Dorian Strong, I was like, this guy I think could potentially be a starter long-term, potentially. So I'm going to jump up and make the move rather than waiting here at 133. We're going to go first off with Kyron Lacey out of LSU. Now, I had a couple different ideas here for wide receiver when I was trying to get to this spot, and obviously I haven't seen a lot of the players down here, but for me, I like Bo Collins. He's interesting. I just don't trust his hands. Kyron Lacey, I have a little more confidence in his hands. He just isn't like a big physical player, so he's going to get boxed out of the catch point a little bit too much. But at 6'3", I think he's got adequate vertical speed. Obviously, he took over a lot of the production for LSU this past year, over 800 yards, 9 touchdowns, which stood out. He's effective in the red zone, and he kind of took over that role, and obviously they produced a ton of receivers. The problem is I don't think there's as much crispness as a route runner. It's much more quick-footed. There's a lot of quick feet, especially for his size. There's more lean to his game, but he doesn't have a lot of, I think, incredible crispness to his routes, and the way that he kind of sets up his routes. The pace within his routes feels kind of rushed a little bit at times, but I think there's still a little bit of a fluidity to his game, and there's an ability to find separation level 1 and level 2, and I think that he can win at the second level because of some of the bend that he works with through his routes specifically. He'll get knocked off a spot, he'll get pushed off by zone backers, you'll see that, he'll get kind of boxed out at the catch point, but overall he can separate at the second level, and I have seen at least enough reliability right now in terms of the hands and some of the discipline when working on the sideline to feel like I wasn't going to be a guy that couldn't catch the ball at all. I was much more concerned with that with a guy like Bo Collins. Definitely not a contested catch piece, but he was a guy that was a move piece. He worked a lot in the slot for LSU. He can push the field vertically a little bit, but to me, this is about what the upside could be. The physical upside to his game, and a guy like Scotty Montgomery now getting to work with him is the shot that I wanted to take here for Kyron Lacey. And that moves me on to my final draft pick, which I'm going to go back to defense, and we're going to go linebacker Eugene Asante out of Auburn. Now, Eugene Asante to me is obviously at this point we're kind of just keeping him from undrafted free agency. He was a guy that popped for me at the Senior Bowl. That's the first time I recognized him. I didn't know who he was before the Senior Bowl, and then he was one of the days I walked away and I was like, Eugene Asante really popped. And I think now knowing who Eugene Asante is, that's very understandable. He's a great athlete. He's a little bit on the shorter side, but he was a huge special teams piece for Auburn specifically. And when you look at him, there's some coverage limitations. He doesn't play with a lot of zone depth. He played a lot outside of the box rather than inside the box, and he doesn't have a ton of length either, so he doesn't fit into like a pure edge role. But I do think that there's a physicalness to his game. He attacks guys at the point of attack. There's a little bit of knockback that he can create, which can allow some stacking opportunity at the next level, which is great. I think he's got a relatively reliable wrap-up tackle technique, and he does show some good get-off when he's working on the ball. He's a big blitzer. So you think about adding Devin White, now you add Asante, you're getting two guys that are downhill, attacking, aggressive linebackers that kind of shake up what we have in that room. You can clearly see what we're going for. We got length at defensive end. On the interior, we got some run stoppers, and now we have a couple of linebackers in here that could potentially move the ceiling up and guys that could just get after it as run stoppers. And obviously we're sticking two guys that can cover in man-to-man coverage in the back end. But I think there's some pop in the upper body. Does a really nice job of finding the ball, in tight spaces, kind of working through traffic, navigating just to find a way to get in on at tackle. He just, to me, isn't the most fluid in coverage. I think there's going to be limitations there. He's probably more of a man coverage piece, but even then, you don't want him on complex routes. A little bit undersized to do with tight end specifically. Eugene Asante at this spot, when you think about losing a guy like Jalen Maven for special teams, he could at very worst, I think, add that element back to the Lions as long as he's comfortable as a tackler and he's reliable there. He might be able to add some of that back as just a downhill, fierce, competitive linebacker that can absolutely be used as a blitzer for you in the meantime. So that's how this draft wraps up. That puts together our final, I'm going to call it a 53, but I didn't even count this, to be honest, but you can cut a couple of these players. I just kind of included all the new additions here for the most part. So let's take a quick look at it. Obviously, defensively first, now we have Kirby Joseph, Brian Branch as starters, but now their backups are Ife Milifanu, who sticks around, as well as our new addition, Eric Murray, to the safety mix. So those are our top four. At linebacker, we're really deep. Alex, Jack, and Derek Barnes are going to start, but for backup, we now have Malcolm Rodriguez next to Devin White with Chris Board back in the mix. Welcome back. And now I listed Devin Azaraku as a kind of a Sam Backer backup, but he's probably going to start at this spot, whether it's stepping in for Barnes or just playing on the edge. I just listed him here to make it easier to read, as well as Eugene Asante, who kind of fill into kind of a same role here. Asante played a little bit in space, but he's not super fluid. You just kind of want him more downhill. He's kind of in a weird tweener type of spot. I just listed them in the same spot. That puts you at defensive line where you have Levi, TJ Reader, Aleem McNeil, and Aiden Hutchinson as your top four. I feel really good about that. But now the depth is tough. Josh Paschal next to our new addition, Brown, which to me makes us much better as a backup nose tackle, much more reliability there with Broderick Martin still in the team. Makai Wingo now has Sebastian Joseph as a veteran to that mix. And then you also have Zadarius Smith, who stuck around. I didn't cut him through this, which is great. Maybe you would have to based on the players that we have, but no, I want to keep him around for pass rush presence. And instead, we added a guy that can be an enforcer against the run in time, and that's Joseph Osai. And then at cornerback, while we didn't really hit it as heavily as maybe I would have liked to, this is clearly relying on your young guys. We're going young at corner. It's a little bit of a risk, but we've seen teams have success doing it. And I am such a big Rakestraw guy that I found myself willing to say, you know what, whether it's inside or outside, if he had to start, I'd be comfortable with it, right? If you didn't bring back Carlton, I'd be comfortable because I was a huge Rakestraw guy, right? I have the jersey, so I can trust it here. So we got Terrion Arnold, who was my number one cornerback last year, and now Dorian Strong as his backup, which is fantastic. I mean, potentially in the future, your cornerback room could be Terrion Arnold, Andis Rakestraw, and Dorian Strong. Those could be your top three corners. Like that could be your cornerback group going forward, which is kind of awesome to think about. At slot, I do have Rakestraw listed as a starter above Meek Robertson, but you still have that vet that could definitely could start inside or outside, listed outside here. And then, of course, Isaiah Rodgers now added to the mix, as well as Kendall Vildor for some depth here as well. So Rakestraw's ability to play inside, as well as Meek Robertson's ability to play inside, and potentially now you can move Branch back to slot if you wanted to. I think we have a lot of guys that can fit into that role if we need to. On to the offensive side, the offensive line starting stays pretty much the same outside of, I just listed our new addition, Tyler Booker, guard out of Alabama. He doesn't have to, but I have him with Christian Mahogany, which kind of makes your interior guards set for the future there, and potentially you could have most of this set for the future, as now Graham Glasgow is now really your backup center because you still have Giovanni Manu, who's your backup tackle with Dan Skipper, and we're going to throw Colby Sorstel back into the mix here as well as a backup guard. So to me, this kind of rounds everything out really nicely with losing Kevin Zeitler. At tight end, Sam Laporta, Brock Wright, Shane Zylstra run it back with the same three there. Maybe a UDFA we pick up or something for some competition, or maybe a different free agent, but I didn't find anybody that I loved right now, so I kind of stuck with the group. Then a receiver, it's Jameson Williams, St. Brown, Tim Patrick, Khalif Raymond, the same four, but we now have Kyron Lacey, who I'm listing as a slot, but you could just list Khalif Raymond as a slot. He just played some slot in college. He actually had 321 yards from slot last season. And then also our new addition, Joshua Palmer, to the receiver mix, which I'm fired up about. Quarterback stays the same. Running back stays the same with Craig Reynolds back, and special teams is the same. So that wraps up our mock offseason 2.0. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. And maybe we'll get to a third one. I don't know. I can't guarantee it based on time reasons, but I definitely want to make a second one. I had a ton of fun doing this. And if you enjoyed, let me know. Thank you for watching.